Hi, my name is Kevin McDonald, and I'm declaring my independence. Independence from what? Why, negative thoughts and energy, of course. Chief among them, hate, division, and fear. You see, I know that we're all one, and together we can solve any problem, save our planet and each other. Please, join me as we come together as one and choose a better way to be. So now, let's begin with my independence report. Everybody, to another episode of my Independence Report. It is a cool day today. Not only is it outside kind of cool over here, it's about 40, but we've got a guest with us today that I've been looking forward to talking with for a long while. He's written a book, but before we get into the book, I have to ask you, because you're one of those people that you invented something that's really, really cool, or had a hand in it, and that's DNA testing. Can you talk a little bit about that to begin with?
Sure. I have a background as a bioengineer, got a PhD from Arizona State University, and I've spent the last number of years working with different governments in the developing world to create DNA testing technologies to pick up the different types of infectious disease that they most deal with in those countries. And along the way, there was a company here in the US that I became involved in that picked up some of my technologies, and they developed a test for the coronavirus in the most recent pandemic. That test has been distributed all over the world to millions of people, and it's been exciting to be a part of that.
So it's pretty good for me to say that you're an educated man, and you've been around, and you've worked really hard at what you do, correct?
That's correct.
You know, one of the things that I was looking at today, because, just a real quick story I have to tell you, because DNA testing has really come to the forefront of what is happening in the world today. And I'll give you an example. There was a guy that I used to sell food for a living, and he was a kitchen guy in a small restaurant, and he was kind of odd and kind of weird and that kind of thing, and come to find out that the government set a trap for him and gave him, and I had no idea that if you lick an envelope and then you send it to a place, they can analyze the DNA and find out about you and what your DNA is. and so I lost contact with this gentleman for a number of years, but as it turns out, I was watching the TV, I was watching the news, and here this man was, as they carted him off to jail because his DNA had proven that he had killed an 11-year-old child, and it had gone cold, and they didn't have the ability to attach him to it, but then they did, and now we're finding out that the DNA is helping to solve a lot of old crimes that people committed and they never were able to get tagged with. So the DNA, it really is exciting what you guys are doing with DNA.
It really is. It is. And, it's that same technology they use in the police reports and to solve crimes that we use in diagnosing disease. It's just, instead of identifying a killer or a criminal, you're identifying the viral culprit, the bacteria that's causing the problem. So it's still identifying the culprit, just with viruses instead of people. Well,
and it's actually a lot more widespread to do what you do, because you're helping millions of people figure out what disease they have and how to fix it and all that kind of stuff. So I really applaud you for what you do. That's your mom should be very proud of you.
She is.
So let's talk in about what you came here to talk about today, and that is the book that you wrote. I'm very interested in it, in its properties, and what conclusions you've come to. And the name of the book is Bringing Heaven Home. And by the way, this is Brent Satterfield. He's a PhD, but he says just call him Brent. And he's the author of this book. How long has the book been out now?
Published on January 14th, so it's been out about a month.
It's hot, 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 hot. So
Yep.
it's right there, and I'm glad that you're here to talk about it, because it is. Well, I lost my brother in the fall. He passed away, and death and dying and what happens afterward has become a huge deal for humanity. There's, depending on which religion you are, or however you phrase it, or if you're spiritual rather than that, and so forth. But you've really had an interesting time with that particular subject, haven't you?
I have.
So explain. No, you can't just leave it there. Explain. Explain. Explain what happened. What is your story?
So I come out of a conservative Christian background, and I've had a number of experiences that at one point in my life I wouldn't have believed were possible. But experiences where I found myself in my body in heaven in a conversation with God, understanding um, aspects of my life, aspects of things that are happening in the world around us that, like I said, I just never would have imagined before. And I've had a series of these experiences. I traditionally, you read about these types of experiences where somebody dies and they have an out of body experience, and then they come back and share what they saw on the other side. And I'm not sure any of mine that I actually died. I had a few where I felt like my heart was going to explode, and I I was afraid that I was going to die, but I never ended up in an emergency room. No doctor bills associated with it, but having the same type of experience.
Well, that's pretty cool, because I'm glad you didn't have any doctor bills, and I'm glad you didn't have what they call a near death experience, or an NDE, because that would be too painful to recover from. I know people that have had those, and it takes a long time. But so, for you, was it like, was there an epiphany for you? How did that come about, that you ended up face to face with God?
The first experience, I was talking with a woman who'd had a series of near death experiences herself. And her first one, she died in a plane crash. And
Ugh.
then the other ones, she had another three after that where she died from complications due to the plane crash. And each one, she got to meet God and converse with him. And so when she came back, one of the gifts that she received on the other side was the ability to help people cross over and have their own experience without having to die. And it's one of those details that people who have near death experiences, they rarely share, but some of them, when they come back from the other side, they're changed. They see things that other people don't see. They hear things, they understand things. And one of her particular gifts was to help people have that transition. And so the first one I had was facilitated, as it were. The second time it was more spontaneous, where I wasn't expecting it at all, and I just felt a sudden rush of energy all over my body. Felt like pins and needles, just but thousands of times more intense, to where my whole body went numb. Couldn't feel my face. I felt this eruption go off in my stomach, like it felt like a volcanic eruption, or an explosion almost. And so that pins and needles feeling just was much more intense. Then it moved up into my heart. And when it got to my heart, it stopped being fun, because that was the part where I thought, wait a minute, I think I'm having a heart attack. and, but as it was, I no longer feared the other side. I no longer feared death. In fact, if there's anything to be afraid of, it seems like it's life. It's not death. Um, but so I surrendered. I let go. I felt my heart explode, and I came through into the other side, where I spent multiple hours in a heavenly state, and had an experience with God and other beings.
And what did they have to say for themselves? What did I mean? It's like I can imagine God saying, "Well, you're not supposed to be here. You're still alive down there." But
Yeah.
what was it like?
So my first encounter, so this kind of walking forward from the second experience that I just started describing with the pins and needles feeling and everything, the first experience on the other side was just being in a state of light. And by light, it was like a feeling that was so joyful, so beautiful, so loving, that I felt like my whole body would have disintegrated if it had been there. Kind of like, if you can imagine the heat that scientists talk about in the Big Bang, it's so hot that it melts the atoms that make up the sun. So you may imagine a heat that could melt the sun. There was this feeling of just joy that the overall sensation was, if my body had been there, it would not have continued. And that light also just had, it was like a feeling of understanding of everything that had gone on in my life up to that point in time. And kind of like if you could just spend years just downloading research on the internet and just going through one web page after another and just getting all of these downloads, except that there, like, my ability to think wasn't limited. And so I could trace down all of these different understandings all at the same time. And it was just beautiful. The whole thing created, it was like an explosion of bliss, of joy, of wonder, of just tears and weeping. And after I'd been in that space for probably 10, 15 minutes, that was when the first person appeared. And coming from my background, the individual of greatest religious significance was Jesus. And so he was the first person to come to me. And he spent a great deal of time talking to me. And unfortunately, it was nothing like you said, of you shouldn't be here, go home. Or the biggest surprise that I found in meeting Jesus, it wasn't the love, because I always expected him to be a loving being. And he was, because like the feeling of having Jesus look into my eyes was one of just being melted from the inside out. It Because it's almost like all the places inside of you that you carry around on a day-to-day basis that you hope nobody else can ever see or touch, or it's like he was looking right into that. But instead of judging the way that each of us would judge each other, it's like he was looking past it. It's like I knew he could see it, but he's looking past it into something that none of us really ever see in each other or in ourselves, which is just this amazing space of love and connection to God. And as he would look into it, it's like there would be this understanding that just washed over you, that was, wow, all of these things that I have judged myself for, I've thought that I just wasn't enough. None of that's true. And so I guess the first surprising thing for me was that in that space, none of the judgments that I had expected from my life experience, like none of those judgments were there. It was this absolute understanding of there is no judgment in heaven. It is love. It is the release from judgment. Judgment is something we deal with here with each other, but there it's this love that releases us. The second thing that surprised me was that Jesus laughs. And and I mean, because we, in all the records we have of Jesus, like he was a very serious person and he cried and he wept. But in that space, he laughs, and his laughter is the most beautiful, wonderful, and healing thing in the world. And it changed me in a way of like, my life is too serious. I need to have more laughter. I need to be more full of the joy that is on that side. The third thing that I learned was that was, I guess, surprising to me, is that the difference between here and there is not as big as we think it is. And it's a difference that by doing all the stuff that you talk about in your podcast, healing these divisions between, just releasing the fear, the guilt, the shame, the judgment, these divisions we have between each other, that is a process where we can find healing individually and as a society to start feeling more of those heavenly feelings here in the body. And that was a huge part of the experience I had there, was just seeing this healing that was to take place on an individual level and on a global level, that would lead us to have the kind of love that they have over there on that side, to have it here in the body.
Because over there is no division. There is no hate. There is no fear. There is no I'm better than you or you're not as good as I am. We are all equal. We are all part of the same. We're all part of the same energy. And the thoughts that you went through when you got there and you had what I would term to be a life review. And you got an opportunity to review the good things that you did, the not so good things that you did, and all of that, and then to meet with Jesus, which is a divine being. And what did you think? What was crossing your mind when you were going through all of this? It was like, holy Moses, what's happening here?
So there's an expression we use all the time down here, which is "I've died and gone to heaven," and that's kind of what I was thinking, because it was so beautiful. It was this sense of everything makes sense, like every pain, every misunderstanding, every what I thought was a bad decision, it just all made sense, and to the point where it wasn't just that he wasn't judging me. It was that I was no longer judging myself. And it wasn't like I was a bad person before. I mean, I at least in the way that society labels good and bad people, I was trying to make DNA tests to help people in the developing world so that they wouldn't have to suffer so much, right? And so you'd think, okay, that's a reasonable life, but still, there was this recognition that no matter what kind of life we live, each one of us has moments and places where we judge ourselves. We feel insufficient. We feel we're not quite measuring up. And it was in those spaces where there's this recognition of, oh my goodness, even like the worst things we think we can do here, we don't understand. We don't see it the way that it's seen on the other side. We don't comprehend the learning that we're going through. We don't comprehend the nature of our being, which is love. So, but so there was this huge release, and to say that it was a release is almost like it's not enough, because it's so if you could compare another release in life, for those who've had positive sexual experiences and that kind of a release where there's this bliss, this opening, this letting go. And if you could take that on a spiritual level and multiply it by 1,000, where you're just melting down in tears and thinking, I understand, I get it, it all makes sense. And so it was beautiful. There was a part of me thinking that I was never coming back here to this place of
You kind of didn't come back, did you? It's like, I don't think I'll stay here. This is kind of cool.
Yeah, it certainly was. But at the same time, like the fear of being in this state, it's like you don't think about this being a fearful state or a hurting state until you get into a place that's all love, and then all of a sudden you go, wait, that place is hell. I don't want to go back there. But
no pun intended, but it might be, it might be literally.
It could be.
You're in hell.
But it's a loving hell. It's a hell that's designed to help us undergo a transformation where we can perceive and receive joy that is far greater than we could if we hadn't come through this place. And so it's like a cocoon for a caterpillar. We're like caterpillars going in the cocoon, and we're incubating, waiting to become butterflies.
I've heard that before, yeah. Well, yeah, that's great. That's great. So I got to ask you. So now you spent time with him, but in your book you detail there's a lot more going on than we have any idea about.
Yes. So is there a specific direction you want me to take that?
No, take it where you will, because from my understanding, see, I have a little joke that I tell about my brother. My brother was a fundamentalist Christian.
Yes.
And he was very concrete, very narrow in his views about heaven and hell and what happens when we go there. And and he passed away. You know where I'm going with this. He passed away in October, and I can just see him going to heaven and saying, well, no, wait. You mean that this is just love and everybody's in love, everybody gets to go? You mean my brother gets to go here? I work so hard, and you know what you understand where I'm going with that is that it's like we don't understand what relationship our earthly life has to the afterlife and how it's all connected, but it's all connected in a very positive, loving way.
It absolutely is. I
So
think
just
that's
take that wherever you want to take that wherever you want to go.
you know, a lot of people like to emphasize this whole moment of realization when you get to the other side and go, "Oh wow, I had it wrong. Maybe I should have done it this way or that way." And you can spend your whole life thinking that life is one way, and then to get to that point, and see it differently, it isn't like you spend the rest of eternity going, "Oh crap, I messed up." There's a moment of deep realization of, "Oh, I understand what my body was doing," but you're no longer associated with your body. And so it's like, yeah, my body had this experience, but it's almost like you were just getting a front row seat to a movie that your body was going through, and you understand the reasons why it went through those things. Even the mistaken understanding becomes part of a bigger lesson that um, that contributes to an expanding joy on the other side.
Wow.
So it kind of takes away all the charge. For me, I was coming out of this whole conservative Christian kind of mindset as well of there's a right way and there's a wrong way, and you better do it right because otherwise you're going to spend the rest of eternity, if not in hell, at least regretting, wishing that you'd done something a little more. And what I didn't understand is so much of that that had nothing to do with God. That had everything to do with the relationship I had with my dad when I was younger, and it just never quite measuring up. Always worrying that I was going to disappoint him somehow. And I had a great dad. I mean, I'm not saying there was anything inappropriate there, but just he's a wonderful dad. But just like many of our parents, they're imperfect. And no matter how hard we try to be those perfect parents, after seeing the examples of our parents, we run into some of the same types of mistakes just because we don't comprehend the love that exists on the other side. So all of us fall short. But recognizing that so many of my conservative beliefs were they were outgrowths of the way that I experienced my dad growing up. And so when I understood love, I understood it through the perspective that I had with my earthly parents. I understood it through what I saw on TV. I understood it through what I saw in other relationships. And so when people said God loved me, I'm automatically thinking, oh, it must be like that. And not realizing that that word completely misleads us. God doesn't love us the way people love us, fortunately. It would be hell if he did. It really
Oh,
would. Um, so getting to the other side, tasting that, experiencing it, you can't come back the same person. You can't. Because everything that your whole life was built on, all the beliefs that you've never stopped to analyze that go into making you who you are, the way that you interact with the world, all of it changes just in a moment because you realize that love isn't what you thought it was. It's this other thing that's so much more wonderful. And so it provides room for you to start accepting self, to see all of the foibles, the imperfections, and just love and accept self as it is today. And in that space, to start seeing other people the same way, to give them that same patience, that same room to learn, to experience, to grow. So I'd say that's probably the biggest thing that I experienced there. But as you bring up, the religious concept, one of the things that shocked me too is that as my experiences continued, I had multiple of these. I wasn't just seeing Christian religious symbols. I was being shown things from other religions as well, and understanding that heaven is a lot bigger than what people imagine it. That we are each in our own relationship with God, and we are creating the types of experiences that will help us understand the direction we want to go in on the other side. It's almost like heaven is, it's this idea of infinite growth where you can take wherever it is that you're learning and just grow in it forever and ever and ever. But instead of just being one direction, like growing in one concept or understanding, it's like a composite of almost an infinite number of understandings and ways that you can grow. And so any one of those paths that you can grow in, you can have experience with God. You can understand God. It's welcome. It's like almost like the science of divinity, where each one of us is learning something unique about how this world works, about how God works. And you can't really create a hierarchy of these experiences and say this one is better than that one. They're different, like, apples and oranges are two different types of fruits, and I may prefer oranges over apples, but that doesn't mean that one is morally superior. They're different flavors, different experiences. And so that was very real for me, was that these different ways of experiencing God, they weren't just metaphorical, like a whole bunch of different paths leading to the same place. They were actually different experiences, different fruits, different flavors. And that was a huge surprise for me as well, is that heaven is just more diverse
And
than anything I'd ever imagined.
you could spend eternity there then.
Yeah, in any one of those, you could just pick one and spend an eternity, or you can go to another and go for an eternity, or you can try to work with the composite, the integration of them. So there's so many different ways to experience it, and it's all based on how do you as an individual feel loved? How do you as an individual express love? And then stepping into that space and honoring it.
So Brent, I gotta ask you, because I've studied near death experiences. I've had hypnosis sessions where I go back to previous lives, and I go back to life between lives, and I'm a firm believer in all of that we're all one, and that we're. But so while you were standing there and you were immersed in the love of God and the wonderfulness of heaven and all the things that you can do there. And did you ask him at one point, what the hell did you make the earth for? Why don't you stay here? This would be so much more fun.
I don't know if when you were if when you were a kid, if you ever had an experience that was just so fun that you never stop and ask questions. It's like you're on this ride and you're just going wherever the ride leads you. And there are moments, I mean, because there were questions I did have, but it was one of those things in hindsight of like, dang, maybe that would have been a great question to ask. And but I did see that it's like what we're doing here on the earth and what's happening in heaven, they're not disconnected. It's this sense of, if we can pull this off, if we can go from the state where we're in right now with all this political division and international violence and everything else, pandemics, whatever it may be, if we can go from this space where our hearts are prone to contract in fear and hurt and judgment, and instead be able to create a movement strong enough where all of us start to open to feel the love of heaven. What I saw was that there was this effect that would start, and it would happen at first with one individual and then another, where people would start to pop like popcorn. And by pop, I don't mean like explode like a tick or something, but but pop as in this immense heavenly joy of an understanding of why it all is, how it came to be, where they start to live walking in these bodies in that heavenly state. And that after enough popped, is almost like when the popcorn hits the right temperature and it all starts going off, that everybody left in the world at that time would all start popping together, and that there would be this huge explosion of joy. And what I saw was that this explosion of joy in this world was connected to the joy that is on the other side. That this world rising, that it changing, that it becoming a heavenly loving place, it somehow augmented the joy of those on the other side. So there seemed to be there seemed to be purpose in it without anybody ever coming out and saying, here's the purpose and here's why it was done. And it was just one of those things where in that space, my heart just accepted it. It was just, yes, of course, it is what it is. And there's no reason to question it because it's just beautiful. And my whole inner being is weeping from the joy and from the beauty of it. And so why would it be any different? There's just no question.
I couldn't agree more. The experience you had was really profound, but there are people that are here that are working towards what you just said, which is developing a way for us to get along, for us to recognize that we're all one. We all want the same things from life. We want a happy family. We want to love people. We want to care, and that we can do that. But in order to do that, we have to recognize that we are all one, and we got to get rid of hate, division, and fear. Because if we don't do that, then the divide stays up, and if we're divided, we cannot win. We need to get together and we need to be together. And I'm so proud of you for doing what you're doing, because it's so needed. It is so needed. And I applaud you greatly. Now I got to ask you though, when you're on the other side, did you get to see some of your relatives and did you talk to anybody like that?
So my experiences did not include my relatives. And I know that there are a lot of people out there that did. And the the main figures in mine, I saw Jesus a couple times, and Jesus led me into the presence of somebody else that I identified with as my father, like a spiritual father, as it were. Just, but and he would be the one that I would have identified with God, and yet there is this relationship with the physical being that you would call God, and then also the light that is in everything. And it's something that it's probably simpler to describe than I'm making it out to be, but that if that light that's in everything, that is this loving intelligence, could be embodied in a single individual, that's who I kind of thought as father. And then he in turn led me into the presence of somebody else who I understood was my spiritual mother. And so to the extent that there was a male and female aspect of this divine light, it was phenomenal. I mean, as much joy as I had coming into the presence of Jesus, it was like this explosion in my heart of euphoria, of bliss, of every feeling I've ever wanted to have or ever felt like I was missing. And then him taking me into the presence of my father, who I identified as God, it was that even bigger explosion. Just like it was as if I had never felt love before, and thought, wow. Because coming out of the Christian background, there's this thought like, well, if Jesus needs to intercede with God, then God must be this mean, angry old man or something. And
Right.
and that wasn't the case at all. It was almost like, oh my goodness, Jesus is just a beginner at this love thing, and this person is even more of that. And it was a beautiful thing to be in. The mother figure, my mother, it was even that again of just, oh. God is not just masculine. There's a feminine element to it, and that feminine element for me was completion. It felt like just everything, like eternity just became complete. But instead of eternity, like in a time-based here to forever, it was, if you could turn it on its side, so you could experience eternity in a moment and just feel completion. That's kind of how it felt being with her.
Oh, that's cool.
And then God then showed me the light, like how it worked, the kind of the structure of heaven, how it grows, how the joy is created. And I was led to understand that even as it is in heaven, so it is on earth, that there are thoughts that we put into our hearts that go out into the light, and they bring back to us what we send out. And this is one of the reasons for healing the heart, is everybody keeps waiting for the world to get better before they feel better. And that's backward. That we have to allow our hearts to start to open, to heal first, and then the world will start reflecting back to us this change inside. And as more of us do that, we're going to see bigger and bigger changes in the world. And those changes, they they don't have to be scary. They can be fun.
Absolutely. So I got to ask you, Doc, because you know you've got a PhD. You are a learned man. You're a scientific man. This had to at one point in time blow your mind that this was happening to you, because it goes against a lot of the stuff that science would teach you. How did you reconcile all that, and why was it you that had this adventure and not somebody else?
That's a wonderful question. I haven't figured that one out about why was it me.
Well, I can tell you, it is part of it. I think is that you are a scientific man. You've got your chops. You've done the work. You've been able to help millions of people, and maybe that partially that was a reward for you to because you really have helped mankind to a great degree, and so they said, well, let's talk to this guy a little bit more. Oh, I don't know.
Maybe. Well, I've after all my experiences, I actually went back and started studying other near-death experiences because I wanted to see what people were seeing on the other side. I just all most of my adulthood, I didn't want to read anybody else's experiences because I was thinking that can't be real. And I didn't want to read things that people were seeing that contradicted my religious beliefs. And then all of a sudden, I'm seeing things that contradict my religious beliefs. And they didn't really contradict them, but they didn't really coincide either. It was like if you took all the words that I was taught in Sunday school, and then just gave it a totally different meaning, just threw out the meaning that everybody thinks it means,
Exactly.
and then bring in this heavenly love, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, now it makes sense. But but it no longer allowed me to fit inside that culture.
Exactly.
Because
Go ahead.
just the way that they saw things, the way that I saw things, just almost opposite. Because the religion was still based on this idea of you got to get it right, or there's this judgment. And I'm thinking, but there is no judgment. Not from God, there is from us. And so getting it right is about figuring out that we are loved no matter what. It's about, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that you're loved no matter what, which then by definition removes hell as an option
It does.
because there
You would,
is no place.
yeah, you no longer choose that. In theory, if you want to create such a place, you want to go there, you can have that experience. People in near death experiences are sometimes shown that, but they're not shown that to go there. They're shown it to say, hey, you're loved so much. If you want to go to this experience and create this, you can. At which point they start having a change in thought and thinking, I don't want to create that. I want to create something different. So, yeah, so there was a big difference with my religious perceptions. The science, I don't know that I had as much of a problem with that. It almost eased the conflict between religion and science
Oh, good.
more, because just going into that space and recognizing, okay, there is a law, as it were, that this world is made on, and scientists are studying that law. The assumption they're making is that law cannot change. And what I understood is that the law is changeable, and that as we change our hearts, that the laws that scientists study are going to evolve. And so it kind of moves you into a place where you start asking the question, do I want to study the changeable law as it pertains to this world? Or do I want to study the laws that allow us to change the laws, to create something more beautiful in this world?
So your belief now is that we are in control of our own destiny. And we can,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
which is, when you look at the conflict or the confines of a particular belief structure, and you believe that you can't change anything, oh well, that's just the way it goes. That's just the way we are. I'm just going to try and be a good person. it changes completely when you open up to the concept that you can be the change. You can make the change that can affect the world, and with other people, with other kernels of popcorn popping at the same time. As that changes, it hits critical mass, which is a scientific term, I think.
Yeah.
And then change can happen, and we can then have heaven on earth.
And I think it's a relieving concept to realize that your way of seeing the world is not the only way. I mean, the first experience I came back from, it almost reinforced my religious beliefs of like, okay, well, maybe there's not a hell, maybe there's not judgment, but I still feel like my way is the right way. And it was only as I had more that I stepped back and said, okay, I have no idea what's going on. Like heaven is bigger, God is bigger. And so, but to realize that there are kernels of popcorn popping in other cultures and other religions and other belief systems, it means that you're not alone. That feeling of, oh wow, I want the world to change, I still don't know how to do it. That you don't have to take care of the whole. You just need to understand what is it that you came to do. And it's not even like this pressure of something that you have to go and do, because that pressure of feeling like you have to is actually moving you out of the space that heaven is in, which is a space of joy, a space of love, of if your heart was absolutely open and free, if you were a little child in a meadow in heaven just chasing after butterflies without a care in the world, what would you do? Because there wouldn't be any obligation or any have tos. It would just arise from your heart being open, spontaneous action. And to the extent that each one of us start tapping into that joy, each in our own cultures, we do have an influence. I mean, you're here doing these YouTube videos and podcasts and other things, trying to bring people together on this conversation of healing division. And that's having an effect. And there's a ripple effect that goes out from that. And as each one of us interacts in our own way, in our own space, and maybe that's simply just showing up. It's the choice to wake up in the morning and do it again. It has an effect. And so we can let go of the responsibility that we are the ones that have to change it, because there is an intelligence inside of us and inside of everything that wants this change as much as we do, and even more. So the more that we open up to that intelligence that's already in our hearts, the more that we feel that love, the more that we walk in step with it, the more change that we're going to see. Not because we did it with our hands, but because actual power came in to help with that transition.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because in my little world, and with the podcast that I do, because this is my passion, I just love doing it. I love talking to people and trying to create something a little bit different. I have given it over, which means that I'm not interested. I don't care who listens to it. I don't care how many people listen to it. The right people will, and those are coming from a different place than me. I can't control that. All I can do is to provide a forum for people like you to come here and talk to folks, to give them something to think about. And that's what I believe what God is. And I would love to have your experience. Without the near death thing, that I don't do that. But I would love to. I would love to get the confirmation, but it doesn't matter, because I know what I believe is that I just need to provide a space for people like you to make other people think. And if we can do that, then, and I really thank you for reaching out. I know you reached out based upon what I have out there, and I really appreciate you doing that. That makes me very happy.
I'm thrilled that you had me on your show. So to your
We
point,
to do this more. As a matter of fact, I'm here in the. Are you available Sunday morning, the 28th of February
Sunday morning, the 28th,
at 9 a.m. Pacific?
9 a.m. Pacific. I should be, yes.
Because I would love
What do
to
you,
have you on. I do a radio show live over the air on Sunday. I'm doing a little commercial here, by the way. Over the air on Sunday mornings. It's called Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald, and it's from 9 till noon. And I would love to have you on from 9 to 10 to talk about your book and all of this, because it's so needed. And this goes out over Seattle, which is the 12th largest media market, and all of that. And I would love to have you do that if you're able to do that. Either February or March, one of the two. You get to pick.
Sounds good. I think February 28th should be just fine. So if you want to, yeah, shoot me a confirmation email, and
I'll do that, and we're gonna book you, because this information is so important and it's so vital. And let me stop and tell you that there are. I've heard what you're telling me before, from and but I haven't heard it put in the way that you're putting it, because you were there. And it adds confirmation and validity to everything that I believe, that there is no hell, that we are loved, and that we can all work together to achieve something great if we choose to, or we can choose not to, in which case we'll have to be either. I believe in reincarnation personally, but whether you do or not, it doesn't matter. I do have to ask, though. Did you ask that question? Do we have to come back and do this again?
I did not ask that question.
Understand, because it would be overwhelming to be in the presence of all of this love and all of these people. It's like, and and your mind was opening up to so many things anyway, that it's hard to do that. But that's okay. You may go back and do. By the way, is there a second book in the works? We're talking. By the way, Bringing Heaven Home is the name of the book. You must go buy it. That's my rule.
Your rule. I
Or
like
don't.
it.
You do whatever you want. Please, I think it would be a really fascinating read. So please do that. But now, we've talked about the first couple of times. How many times have you done this?
Multiple. And as in terms of the intensity of that type of an experience, I've had 4 that would be that kind of a crossover experience with that intensity. What I've discovered, you kind of alluded to this earlier, is that you'd love to have that personal confirmation, without having to die to go do that, but to have that experience. And what I've understood, what I've seen, is that each of us has a light in our hearts. We all have an internal compass. And sometimes that compass is hard to hear because all the emotional stuff in our lives is just shutting us down. But when our hearts are open, you kind of get this feeling of, this feels right. This feels good. This feels like where I want to go. And that feeling is as valid as being in God's presence. The difference is it's not coupled with this intensity of euphoric joy and explosion of bliss, and I understand the beginning to the end kind of feeling. And for some reason, the mind wants to say, well, because this one was coupled with this bliss, that it's valid, and this one down here is not as valid because it wasn't coupled with that bliss. But it's the same intelligence.
I get it.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
It's the same intelligence moving you. And the beauty is, because you haven't had all of that extra joy, you're a little bit more humble, perhaps, in your approach to, well, I felt these things and I think this is what's going on. And sometimes for those of us who've been in that other space, like, well, especially coming out of a conservative background, an authoritative background, it's like, well, I saw God, so now I know, and this is how it works. And I felt that way. I went through that after my first, and maybe even my second experience to a certain degree, was kind of in that space of, well, I saw, so now I know what's going on. And then to realize that, yeah, so what, I saw, but it was like a drop in an infinite bucket. And so there's more to see, there's more to understand, and that maybe having a little more humility helps. So
humility is good.
Yeah. So I think that your experience and the experience of your listeners when they really stop and they connect with their heart and they listen to what their heart's telling them, that's valid. It's beautiful. And the question is, are you going to trust your heart as much as all the other voices in the world? Are you going to trust your heart as much as everything that your parents told you or society told you? Are you going to listen and open your heart and trust that even if you make a mistake, it's all beautiful? There really is no mistake as long as we keep learning, as long as we keep learning from things.
What you're saying has a lot of validity to it, because there are times when I will read something and I will go, "That's it." There's a book called Journey of Souls. It talks about taking people into hypnosis, and then they have the same kind of experience that you had on the other side, and to a person, they all roughly describe what you're describing. It's a place of love, total acceptance. That we view it as, from our perspective down here, differently than they view it from up there. And so when you're down here, and this is what I implore people, is when you're down here and something feels right, if something feels like it's be it a song, be it something that you part of a movie, some listening to someone like you. It's like one of them that has always got to me, and I heard it, during, it was from the movie Braveheart, and you'd think that's a real, a macho type movie, but there was a point in it where he says, where his father says, who had died, and he turns to him and he says, "Your heart is free. Have the courage to follow it." And so, and for me, that was like, because that got, it was like your heart is free. Follow it, and follow the love that you have with it. That's what I got out of that. And so you had the experience, but only from the standpoint that you can come back to us and say, you don't need to have that. You can
Exactly.
You can still believe it. You can still do it. Just follow your heart.
And it's almost more beautiful when you can trust your heart without having to have that type of an experience. It's just that absolute trust, that faith, that surrender. It is a beautiful thing.
So I got to ask you, you've had all these experiences. You've written the book. I sense there's another book coming. Should be. And what are you going to do now that what are you going to do with the rest of your life? Are you still doing the DNA stuff? What are you going to do? What are your plans, sir?
So right now, the plan is to uh, participate in a few more podcasts, a few more places to create some publicity for the book. I am, there's the professional side of life, the things that you do to make sure that you've got your needs met, that you're providing for yourself, and you're doing that in an honorable way. And so, to the extent that I continue to have a meaningful role in the scientific world, I'm happy to play that. And what the future holds after that, I don't know. That'll be really interesting to see. My heart has become much more interested in connecting with people like you, with people like your listeners, in just sharing. Because after being on the other side, there was this sense that nothing we can achieve in this life, nothing we can achieve with our hands, really has the same level of satisfaction as when we connect with another human being. And to the extent that there are those of us out there who are looking, we're trying to understand what's going on in this life of ours. We're trying to understand what's going on in our hearts. It's an amazing thing to run into somebody else who may be from a different culture or belief set, and then find that they have like a missing piece to your puzzle. And so I find that there isn't really a division between those who've had experiences like mine and those who have not, meaning that I can learn just as much from people who haven't had those experiences as they can learn from me. And so it's just joyful to connect with people who are coming from all these different backgrounds, to see what they're learning, to see what they're understanding, because there is a learning that takes place even outside of what it is we're saying with our mouths. Like in my first experience with the woman who died in the plane crash, she and I, the thing that triggered that, it was so interesting. Like I came in to see her, and it was like this feeling inside of me, like I had a piece of her heart, like I had a puzzle piece for her. And I saw in my mind a vision of myself placing my hand on her heart. And I started to reach out to place my hand on her heart, and I got self-conscious. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that's on her chest, and maybe I should do that. But she understood. She like saw what it was that I was trying to do, and she says that's where Jesus puts his hand. And she grabs my hand and just puts it right on her chest. And as soon as she did, there's this explosion of just energy in me. And so we hadn't had any dialogue. It wasn't like I said something smart and she said something smarter. It was just two people that happened to have pieces of each other's puzzle that came together in the same place at the same time, and they had a meaningful interaction. And that meaningful interaction caused an explosion inside of me, caused me to move into a space that I had never experienced before, that I didn't know was possible. And so, likewise, I just have that ongoing interest to meet with others, to facilitate those types of interactions. As people come together, they feel their hearts changed, they feel confirmation of things that their hearts have been telling them, and they have courage to let their hearts start creating those things. The more of us that feel that permission to start believing the most beautiful things in our hearts, the more that we are going to see shift, not only in our own lives, but in the world around us.
And you know what's really cool that you're going to run into now that the book has been out, and it's been out for a whole month now, maybe not even a month, not even a month. What you're going to find is what I find is that the work that you're doing, the work that I'm doing, I affect people that I'll never know.
Yeah.
People that I'll never meet will have the work that I do in bringing people like you to them has an impact, and it has a positive impact. And that's all I need. I'll let spirit, I'll let God decide how he wants to use all of that. None of my business. All I do is follow and do what my heart tells me to do, and this is what it tells me to do. So, and you're the same way. So you're going to have people that are going to email you in the future that they're going to tell you changed their life, and there is nothing more sacred and rewarding than that. So I applaud you.
Thank you.
It really is true, and you deserve everything that you can get as far as monetary reward and stuff. All that stuff will come, but just the love and care of your fellow man, and you'll get that, and you have that. So I appreciate it. So we're coming up on the hour. Damn it, darn it, because it's hard. It happens so fast. What I'd like to do is to give you an opportunity to talk to the audience, both the audience that's here now, because we have people listening here now, and also this is going to be a podcast and it's going to be a YouTube event. So whatever you'd like to tell them, I would love for you to speak from your heart to tell them.
I just want to say that your experience matters. That no matter what you've been through in your life, how insignificant or how difficult, it absolutely matters. The relationship between us and heaven is a beautiful thing. And as much as there is this reverence from us towards the divine, there almost is this, on the other side, there is a reverence for our experience. And there is no one else in this world that can replicate what you are experiencing right now. You have the only view that sits from inside your body with the things that you understand, the way that you see the world. It matters. It's beautiful. You matter. And if you ever wonder what it is that you're supposed to be doing next, just listen to your heart. Imagine yourself happy. Imagine yourself free. Imagine yourself connected. And sometimes that can be hard to do if life feels like it hasn't treated you very well. But imagine it anyway, until you can feel your heart start to respond, until it starts to open. And wherever you see yourself when your heart opens, that is probably where you ought to be.
That's brilliant. Is there more?
I'm sure I could keep talking for a while, Kevin, but I just realized we hit the hour. So,
Well, in this case, that doesn't matter. So if because what you're saying is beautiful, and
thank you.
it is something that people need to hear, that it's okay, that we're all right, even if you've been abused, even if there've been problems, even if you're not, you're still loved, and you're not alone.
Absolutely. Heaven celebrates our belly flops.
I tend to think they get the biggest kick out of it, because I think there is a lot of laughter in heaven.
There is. And we don't like to think about people laughing at our pain and our suffering. And it isn't like that, because they're not laughing at us, but it's that we don't share the proper perspective yet. And once we share that same perspective, we'll find ourselves laughing with them. And it's the most healing thing, because in a moment, an instant, this heaviness that feels like it would never lift is gone. And so the heaviest things that we face in this life, they're insubstantial. They're very substantial here. They're very real here, but they're insubstantial. And there is a day, a moment, an understanding that comes when it's just like a night dream, like waking up and realizing, oh, I understand now why that was. There's no more heaviness. It's gone.
So I'm assuming you're not as scared of death anymore.
No, I'm more scared of life.
Oh, I can totally get that. I can totally get that. So Dr. Brent, it's been great having you here, and I look forward to having you. And by the way, it's Brent Satterfield, and the book Satterfield. Sorry about that. I am famous for massacring names, just so you know.
That's fine.
Satterfield, PhD, and he's written the book Bringing Heaven Home. Amazon's got it. They got a great big thing on the top of the page for you. So and your entire bio and all that kind of stuff. So get the book. It will be a life-changing experience if you choose it to be. Anything else you'd like to add, sir?
Nope, I feel good.
Okay. Hold on just a second, young man, and I've got to do this, and then I want to talk to you before we wrap it up and talk to you about Sunday, and I'll be right back.
Sounds perfect.
Hey, and thanks for listening to this episode all the way to the end. Hey, pretty cool. Hey, don't forget to follow us so you can receive regular updates and new posts. And remember, take care of each other, because each other's all we've got. See you next time on My Independence Report.